Omega found a baby crying in snow. It grabbed her, and the Alpha King's mark appeared on her wrist. She wrapped her tattered cloak tighter around her small frame and pressed onward, each step sinking into the thick, icy snow. The world around her was silent, save for the groaning of trees weighed down by frost and the distant echo of some unseen creature moving in the shadows. Winter had come early that year, harsher than anyone could remember, and the villages lay buried under drifts of white. Her name was Elara. She was known as an Omega, quiet and gentle, often overlooked by the people of her village. But she had a heart that carried courage and kindness, even when the world around her was cruel and unforgiving. Tonight, though, courage was not what led her into the blizzard. It was curiosity, and a faint sound that called to her from the icy darkness. A soft, plaintive cry drifted through the wind. Elara froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was weak, almost drowned by the storm, yet unmistakable. It was the sound of a baby. She hesitated. The forest was dangerous, especially at night, and rumors whispered of wolves with glowing eyes and spirits that preyed on the unwary. But something inside her would not let her turn away. The cry came again, more insistent this time, carrying a tiny thread of warmth and desperation that seemed impossible against the freezing world around her. "Who's there?" she called softly, her voice trembling. The wind swallowed her words almost immediately. Another cry answered her, closer now. It tugged at something deep in her chest, a sense of responsibility, of duty, and of fate. With careful steps, Elara pushed through the thick snow, following the sound. Her legs ached and her fingers were stiff with cold, but she refused to stop. Then, in a small hollow between two snow-laden pines, she saw it, a bundle wrapped in tattered cloth, lying in the snow. The baby's tiny face was pale and streaked with tears, its eyes wide and frightened. Elara's breath caught. She knelt beside the child, brushing the snow from its small body. It's okay," she whispered, trying to calm the trembling infant. The baby reached out with a tiny hand, and as it did, it grasped her wrist. Elara felt a strange warmth spread through her skin, a tingling sensation that crawled up her arm. And then she saw it, the mark. A glowing sigil, intricate and impossible, appeared on her wrist, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. She gasped, staring at it in awe and fear. The mark was the symbol of the Alpha King. Stories said that his power was unmatched, that his bloodline carried ancient magic and curses. Only those he chose, or those touched by destiny, would ever bear his mark. Yet here it was, glowing on her skin, binding her to a fate she could not understand. The baby whimpered, and Elara lifted it closer, instinctively wrapping it in her cloak. Its small warmth contrasted sharply with the icy wind. She felt a strange connection, an invisible thread tying her, the child, and something far greater than herself together. "Why me?" she whispered to the empty forest, but the snow offered no answer. Only the howl of the wind and the distant creak of frozen branches responded. Elara stood, cradling the baby, her mind racing. She had to get somewhere safe. The village was miles away, and no one would dare venture into the storm at this hour. Yet leaving the forest without understanding the mark seemed impossible. She could not ignore the way her wrist tingled, the way the mark pulsed as if it had a will of its own. With determination, she began walking again, this time more cautiously. The snowstorm had intensified, blurring the line between ground and sky. Every step was a battle against the cold and the drifting snow. She held the baby close, whispering softly to soothe it, though the wind carried her words away. As she moved, the forest seemed to change. Shadows deepened, twisting into shapes that were almost, but not quite human. The wind carried whispers, faint voices that spoke in a language she did not understand, yet somehow she felt they were warnings. Fear pressed against her chest, but she forced herself onward. Something about the mark told her she could not stop. Hours passed, though the night felt endless. Her legs were numb, her lips blue, and the baby's cries occasionally pierced the storm. And then in the distance, a faint glow appeared, a warm light flickering like a distant candle in the darkness. She rushed toward it, hope rising in her chest. It was a small cabin, half buried in snow, smoke curling from the chimney. She pounded on the door, desperate, and it creaked open to reveal an old woman with wide eyes. "My child!" Elara cried, but the woman shook her head, confused. I found this baby," Elara said, holding out the swaddled bundle. The woman's expression softened, and she gestured for Elara to come inside. The cabin was warm, filled with the scent of herbs and firewood. Elara placed the baby on a small bed, checking it over. It seemed unharmed, though exhausted. And all the while, the mark on her wrist glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the baby's tiny heartbeat. The old woman, whose name was Mela, looked at the mark and gasped. That is not just a mark," she said, her voice trembling. "It is the king's sigil. The Alpha King does not give it lightly. You have been chosen or cursed, perhaps both." Elara felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Chosen? Cursed? I don't understand." Mela shook her head. "Few ever do. The mark binds you to the king and to the fate of this child. You must be careful. There are forces in this kingdom that would kill to control such power. Even the snow itself may not be safe for you now." Fear and awe battled inside Elara. She looked at the baby, whose eyes had finally closed in sleep, and felt a protective surge she could not ignore. Somehow, this tiny life was connected to her, to the king, and to something larger than the world she knew. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed through the forest outside, and the snowstorm seemed to intensify unnaturally. The cabin shook as if the wind itself had grown teeth. Shadows passed over the walls, and for a moment, Elara felt the presence of something ancient and powerful watching her, assessing her worth. The old woman grabbed her arm. "The king will come for you," she said solemnly. "He always comes when the mark is awakened. You must be ready." Alara's heart pounded. She did not know the Alpha King, had never seen him, but the weight of destiny pressed against her chest. Her simple life in the village, her quiet days and lonely nights, had ended the moment the baby took her hand. Hours passed, though sleep was impossible. She stayed by the baby, watching over it as the snowstorm raged outside. The glow on her wrist continued to pulse, a reminder that she was no longer free. She was tied to the fate of a king, a kingdom, and a child whose future might decide the course of all their lives. And in the distance, through the howl of the wind and the curtain of snow, she thought she saw a figure, a shadow, taller than any man, cloaked in black, moving toward the cabin with the inevitability of a storm. Elara clutched the baby tighter. Fear, awe, and something new, something that felt like longing, filled her chest. The storm outside roared, the snow swirled violently, and the mark on her wrist burned with light. Whatever was coming, she knew one thing: her life had changed forever. The night stretched on, endless and uncertain, and as the first hint of dawn touched the sky, a sense of destiny pressed on her like the weight of the snow itself. Somewhere out there, the Alpha King approached, drawn to the mark that had chosen her. Elara whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, "I will protect you no matter what." The wind answered with a howl that sounded almost like a warning. And in the distance, shadowy eyes watched through the blizzard, waiting, calculating, as if the kingdom itself held its breath. The Omega had found the baby in the snow. The baby had taken her hand, and the mark of the Alpha King had appeared on her wrist. The storm raged, the forest waited, and fate had begun to move. The first light of dawn barely touched the forest, and the blizzard had begun to ease. Snow still swirled around the cabin, but the edges of the trees were now visible, coated in frost like silver armor. Elara sat on the floor, cradling the baby, eyes wide and sleepless. Her wrist throbbed where the mark glowed faintly, a pulse of warmth and power she could not explain. She kept glancing at the cabin door, as if expecting the world itself to split open and reveal the Alpha King. And she was not wrong. The door creaked slowly, though there had been no one near it. Alara's breath caught, and she instinctively held the baby closer to her chest. The figure that stepped through the doorway was tall and imposing, his presence filling the small cabin as though the walls themselves recognized him. He wore a dark cloak dusted with snow, and beneath it, armor that gleamed with an almost ethereal light. His hair was black as night, eyes like steel, and his gaze it was impossible to look away. "You bear my mark," he said, his voice deep and steady like a storm barely contained. "And yet you are alive. How?" Alara's heart pounded, but she forced herself to speak. I don't know. I found this baby in the snow. It took my hand." She lifted her wrist to show him, and the mark shimmered faintly, as if acknowledging him. The Alpha King stepped closer, and the air around him seemed charged with power. He knelt, studying the mark on her wrist, his expression unreadable. "The mark chooses whom it will," he said softly. "It binds us together. That child, do you understand what it carries?" Alara shook her head, confusion and fear battling with the strange pull she felt toward him. "I don't. I only know it's alive and it needed me. I couldn't leave it." His eyes softened ever so slightly, and for a brief moment the legendary Alpha King looked less like a ruler of darkness and more like a man burdened by 1,000 losses. "You are brave," he said, "and foolish, both in equal measure. That courage may protect the child or destroy you both." The baby stirred, crying softly, and Alara leaned forward instinctively, whispering soothing words. The king's gaze shifted to the child, and a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. He knelt beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed, and his voice dropped to a murmur. "Do you understand? This child carries the key to the survival of our bloodline. If it falls into the wrong hands—" His words hung in the air like a blade. Alara's heart tightened. She had been thrust into a world she could barely comprehend. I will protect it," she said, the words trembling but firm. "I don't care what comes. I will not let anything happen to it." The king's gaze softened further, but his hands remained still. "The mark binds you to me, and through you to the child. You are part of something far greater than your village, your forest, or even your life." For a moment, the cabin was silent except for the wind brushing against the walls and the baby's soft breathing. Then the king rose, towering above her again. "You must come with me. There is no choice. The kingdom awaits and danger follows us even now." Alara hesitated. The thought of leaving her home, however small, terrified her. But the pull from the mark, the gravity of his presence, and the weight of responsibility to the baby left her no options. She nodded slowly, standing and tucking the baby close. I will follow," she said. The Alpha King extended his hand, not in a gesture of dominance, but as an anchor, a bridge between the fear in her heart and the unknown ahead. She took it, and the warmth of his grasp sent an unexpected shiver through her. He led her through the snow-laden forest, moving with an effortless grace, as though he belonged to the storm itself. They traveled for hours, the landscape shifting from dense trees to open plains glistening in frost. Along the way, the king did not speak often, but his presence was constant and reassuring. Alara noticed how the mark on her wrist pulsed gently in rhythm with the baby's heartbeat, as if the magic within the symbol was guiding them forward. Finally, they reached the edge of the kingdom's capital. The city rose from the snowy plains like a fortress of ice and stone, towers reaching into the gray sky. Smoke spiraled from chimneys, and lights glimmered like fireflies in the early morning haze. Guards clad in silver armor lined the streets, their expressions a mixture of awe and caution as the Alpha King passed. Alara felt both fear and wonder. She had heard stories of this city, of its king, and of the power that lingered in every stone of the castle. Yet seeing it now, she realized the legends barely scratched the surface. The kingdom itself seemed alive, breathing in the cold air, watching them approach. The king led her to the castle gates, where a single guard bowed deeply. "Alpha King," he said, his voice steady but reverent. "The mark has chosen her." Alara's stomach tightened. "Chosen me?" she whispered to herself, barely able to comprehend the weight of the words. "Yes," the king replied, his eyes meeting hers. "And through you, the child." The mark does not lie. Inside the castle, the walls were lined with portraits of kings and queens, warriors and mystics, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. Alara felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. She had never imagined a place like this existed outside of stories. The baby stirred in her arms, and she adjusted it, feeling a fierce protectiveness that surprised even herself. The king led her to a private chamber, a room warm from the fires with blankets and a cradle waiting. He motioned for her to set the baby down. "Here," he said, "this is safe for now, but you must understand the mark brings attention. Many will seek the power it carries." Alara nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I understand, I will protect it." The king studied her for a long moment. "You are stronger than you know," he said finally. "And yet, there is fear in your eyes. That fear is not weakness. It is what keeps you alive." For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Alara felt something she could not name. It was not fear, nor was it simple curiosity. It was a pull, a connection forged by destiny, the mark, and the tiny life they both now held dear. Before she could speak, a loud noise echoed from the hallway outside, a shout, a clatter of armor, and the sound of running feet. The king's posture stiffened instantly, his hand moving to a hidden blade at his side. "Trouble," he said calmly, though his eyes were sharp. "They have sensed the mark." Alara's heart raced. "Who?" she asked, though she feared the answer. The king's expression was grim. "Rivals of the crown. They would kill to claim the child and the power it carries. We have little time." He moved swiftly, gesturing for Alara to follow. They passed through hidden corridors, lit by flickering torches, the baby safe in her arms. Guards and servants seemed to step aside automatically, recognizing the Alpha King and the child marked by destiny. Alara felt the pulse of the mark again, stronger this time, as if it was guiding them, warning them, connecting them to something greater. Finally, they reached a secluded tower, high above the city, where the wind whipped fiercely against the stone walls. The king set the baby gently in a cradle, tucking it in with careful hands. "It will be safe here," he said, "but you must remain vigilant." Alara looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "And you? Will you leave me to guard it alone?" The king's eyes softened. "I will not leave, but some battles you must face, even with me at your side. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting despite it." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words and the truth in them. The mark on her wrist pulsed, warm and steady, and for the first time she understood that this connection was not a curse to fear, but a power to embrace. A shadow passed across the window, unnoticed at first, but the king saw it immediately. His hand went to his sword. "They are coming," he said. "Soon the trials of the mark will begin, and you, Omega, will be at the center of it all." Alara felt fear rising, but also something else, a flicker of determination, courage she had never known she possessed. She glanced at the baby, sleeping peacefully in the cradle, and then at the king, standing guard like a shadow against the dawn. Whatever trials awaited them, she knew she could not falter. The mark on her wrist glowed once more, bright and steady, as if sealing their bond and signaling the beginning of a journey neither of them could have imagined. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the promise of danger, destiny, and power. And somewhere in the snowy city, eyes watched, waiting for the moment when the Alpha King, the Omega, and the child marked by fate would face their first true test. The storm had passed, but the real trial was only beginning. The morning sun barely pierced the icy veil over the castle, casting pale gold light over the snow-draped towers. Inside the secluded tower where Alara and the baby were kept, warmth from the fireplace battled the lingering chill, but the air felt heavy with unspoken questions and hidden dangers. The Alpha King had left early that morning, citing urgent matters of state, leaving Alara with a sense of both relief and unease. She sat by the cradle, watching the baby's soft breathing, her fingers brushing the tiny hands and feet. The mark on her wrist pulsed gently, a reminder that she was bound to forces far greater than herself. Every pulse seemed to whisper secrets she could not yet understand. Curiosity and fear coiled together in her chest, making her both anxious and determined. Alara leaned back against the stone wall and closed her eyes. A memory, or perhaps a vision, washed over her, sudden and vivid. She saw snow falling over a vast kingdom, a throne encased in shadows, and a man whose eyes were both sorrowful and fierce. The child in her arms appeared in the vision, crawling toward him, glowing faintly. She gasped and opened her eyes. The mark burned lightly on her wrist. "What is this?" she whispered. "What do you want me to see?" The baby stirred, cooing softly as if sensing her unease. Alara realized that the child was not ordinary. It was connected to the Alpha King, to her, and to the destiny that bound them together. And if the visions were true, the child might hold the key to a curse that had haunted the kingdom for generations. She rose, pacing the room, trying to make sense of the images. The Alpha King had said little of the child's importance beyond warning her that danger would follow. But now she understood. The child was more than a life to protect. It was a symbol, a hope, and perhaps a weapon in a world ruled by power, fear, and ancient magic. Her thoughts were interrupted by the quiet rustle of fabric. She turned to see a figure at the doorway. The Alpha King stood there, his cloak dusted with snow from the morning ride he had taken through the city. His expression was unreadable, yet his eyes softened when they met hers. "You've been awake," he said, stepping inside, his boots silent on the stone floor. "And the child? It is safe," Alara replied. "But I saw something, a vision maybe, I don't know what it means." She held out her wrist to show the faintly glowing mark. "It reacted when I held the baby." The king's gaze lingered on the mark, then on her eyes. "The visions are part of the mark. It shows you fragments of the past, present, and possible futures. Not all of it is clear, and not all of it is yours to control. But the child, it is tied to everything. To the curse, to the kingdom, and now to you." Alara swallowed hard. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can protect it." The Alpha King stepped closer, placing a hand near her shoulder, though he did not touch her directly. "Readiness is not required, only courage, and you already possess it. That is why the mark chose you. That is why you hold this child." His words, though calm, carried a weight that settled over her chest. She felt small in the presence of his authority, yet strangely seen, as if he recognized not just the Omega before him, but the woman who could rise to meet her destiny. Before she could respond, a loud commotion erupted outside the tower doors. Shouts, the clatter of armor, and distant cries filled the hallway. Alara's heart raced. "They are here," the king said simply, his hand moving to a hidden dagger at his waist. His gaze softened for a moment at the baby, sleeping peacefully in the cradle. "You must remain here. Do not intervene unless I call you." Alara nodded, gripping the edge of the cradle. "Be careful," she whispered. He gave her a fleeting look, one that held more than words could express, before disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Minutes passed, long and tense. The echoes of footsteps, shouts, and the occasional clash of metal reminded her of the danger that now surrounded them. When the sounds finally subsided, the Alpha King returned, his cloak slightly disheveled but his eyes calm. "They were ambitious fools," he said, lowering himself into the chair beside the cradle. "They sought the child, believing the power it carries could be theirs. They will not try again, not yet, but others will come, always others." Alara studied him, the lines of worry softened by a rare expression of relief. How can anyone not know the child's importance? How can they be so blind? "The world often sees only what it wants to see," the king said, his voice distant. "Power draws the foolish and the desperate. That is why the child and the mark must be protected. That is why you must understand your strength." Her eyes drifted to the baby, and she felt a fierce warmth rise in her chest. It was one thing to follow the Alpha King, to see his strength and command. But to cradle this tiny life, knowing it depended on her, gave her courage she had never known. The mark pulsed warmly against her wrist, echoing her heartbeat. "Tell me," she said finally, her voice steadying, "what curse does the child carry? What must I know?" The king's expression darkened. "The curse is old, older than this city, older than the throne. My bloodline has carried it for generations, a shadow over every ruler, every choice, every bond. The child may hold the key to breaking it, but also to spreading it further. That is why the mark chose you. Only someone with courage, compassion, and unwavering resolve could endure what is to come." Elara absorbed his words, the weight of them pressing on her shoulders. She had been chosen for something monumental, yet terrifying. Yet even in the face of fear, she felt a stirring of purpose. This was not simply survival, it was destiny, and she would rise to meet it, for the child, for the kingdom, and perhaps for herself. Days passed in the tower. The Alpha King came and went, attending to matters of the kingdom while ensuring that Elara and the child were safe. Their moments together were quiet but charged, each glance, each touch of the baby's tiny hands, carrying unspoken meaning. The king began to speak more to her, teaching her the significance of the mark, the weight of the child's importance, and the history of the curse that loomed over them all. Elara listened, learning quickly, though fear often threatened to overwhelm her. Yet the more she learned, the stronger she felt. She began to understand that courage was not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. And she began to see the man behind the legend, a king bound by duty, yet capable of care, and a protector who trusted her in ways no one else ever had. One evening, as the sun dipped below the icy horizon, casting golden and purple hues across the snow-covered city, the Alpha King and Elara stood together by the window. The baby slept in the cradle, soft breaths lifting and falling with a gentle rhythm. "You have grown stronger in these days," the king said quietly. "The mark responds to courage, and yours has proven unwavering, but the trials ahead, they will test more than your strength. They will test your heart." Elara turned to him, the warmth of the fire reflecting in her eyes. "I will not fail, not the child, not you, not anyone who depends on me." A faint smile touched his lips. "I believe you," he said, "but courage alone may not be enough. You will need wisdom, patience, and understanding, and above all, trust. Trust in yourself and trust in the bond that now connects us." The mark on her wrist pulsed brightly, and she felt a rush of warmth and clarity. For the first time, the weight of destiny seemed like a mantle she could bear, rather than a burden that would crush her. Suddenly, the baby stirred, and a soft glow emanated from its tiny body. Elara gasped, lifting the child gently. The glow spread faintly into the room, illuminating the king's face in an ethereal light. The Alpha King's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of awe crossing his stoic features. "The child," he whispered. "It is awakening something, something old and powerful. You must be ready. Soon the truth of the curse, the power, and the danger will reveal itself fully." Elara held the baby closer, feeling the pulsing warmth of the mark and the soft life against her chest. She did not feel fear this time. She felt determination, courage, and a strange, comforting connection to the king. Their fates were intertwined, bound by destiny, the child, and the mark that glowed between them. Outside, the wind whispered against the stone walls of the tower. Shadows shifted in the snow, unseen eyes watching, waiting. The city seemed quiet, but Elara knew the danger was not gone. It had only been delayed. And the mark, pulsing steadily, was both a warning and a promise. Their story, their trials, and their journey had only just begun. The Alpha King stepped closer, his presence steady and strong. "Rest now," he said softly. "We face what comes together, and when the time arrives, you will not face it alone." Alara nodded, holding the child to her chest. For the first time since finding the baby in the snow, she felt a sense of purpose, of belonging and of courage that matched the pulse of the mark. The kingdom, the curse and the future of them all rested in her hands, and she would not falter. As the first snowflakes of evening drifted past the window, glinting like tiny stars, a faint sound reached them, a whisper carried on the wind, a warning or perhaps a call. Alara stiffened, but the king's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, grounding her. Together they faced the unknown, bound by destiny, courage, and the fragile, glowing life that slept in her arms. The Omega had learned the truth of the mark. The child's importance was beyond measure. And the world, with all its shadows and dangers, was watching their every move. The trials were beginning. The snow outside the castle had softened into a steady fall, coating the city in silence. The world seemed frozen, yet within the walls of the Alpha King's fortress, tension hummed like a living thing. Alara stood by the tower window, cradling the baby, her wrist pulsing faintly with the mark. Each heartbeat of the child sent a ripple through the symbol, reminding her of the invisible threads binding them all together. The Alpha King approached silently, his presence a steady shadow against the flickering firelight. He did not speak at first, simply observing the baby and the young Omega. Then his voice broke the quiet, low and steady. "They have grown bolder," he said. "The rivals I warned you about they are preparing. Soon they will attempt to claim the child." Alara's hands tightened around the baby. "We are ready," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I will not let anyone take it." The king's eyes softened slightly, though the tension in his jaw remained. "You have courage, but courage alone will not protect the child. You must learn to trust the mark and yourself. Its power flows through you and through your choices. It will guide you if you allow it." Alara looked down at the baby, who stirred in her arms. A faint glow emanated from the child's tiny body, soft and warm. The pulsing light was stronger than ever, and she felt a strange surge of energy pass through her, as if the mark and the child were one. Her heart beat faster, filled with awe and determination. Before she could respond, a commotion rose from below the tower. Shouts and the clatter of boots echoed through the hallways. Alara's pulse quickened. The king's eyes sharpened and he moved toward the door, his cloak flowing like liquid shadow. "They are here," he said simply. "Stay with the child. Do not come unless I call." Alara nodded, though fear prickled at the edges of her courage. She pressed the baby closer, feeling the warmth of life against her chest. The mark on her wrist pulsed steadily, guiding her, reminding her that she was part of something larger than fear or doubt. The door opened suddenly and a figure slipped into the room, a messenger breathless and wide-eyed. "Alpha King," the young man said, "they are moving through the outer gates. Their numbers are growing. You must act quickly." The king's gaze flicked to Alara, a silent reassurance in his eyes. "I will return," he said. "Trust in yourself, Omega, trust in the mark. You are stronger than you know." With that, he vanished into the hallway, leaving Alara alone with the child. The sound of footsteps faded, replaced by the soft hiss of the falling snow outside. She took a deep breath, centering herself, feeling the pulse of the mark and the child as one steady rhythm. Hours passed, though time seemed to stretch endlessly. Alara paced the room, whispering softly to the baby, practicing the calm and focus the king had shown her. She felt the mark respond to her emotions, glowing brighter when she focused on courage and dimming when doubt crept in. Slowly she began to understand. This was not simply a symbol of fate. It was a tool, a guide, and a connection to something far greater than herself. Suddenly, the baby stirred violently, letting out a cry that was stronger, sharper than before. The glow from its body intensified, casting shadows across the walls. Alara gasped, instinctively holding the child closer. She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, as if the mark was reaching deep into her soul, urging her to act. Outside, the castle walls shook with the force of an unseen attack. Alara's heart pounded. She had never felt so alive, so connected to something that was both frightening and wondrous. She whispered to the baby, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "It's okay. We are together. We are strong." The glow from the child flared, and for a moment the room was bathed in light. Alara felt a rush of energy course through her body, a clarity and focus she had never known. The mark pulsed in unison with the child's heartbeat, guiding her thoughts, her instincts, and her resolve. Then, a shadow passed across the window. Alara's heart jumped. She pressed the baby closer and turned to see figures moving in the courtyard below. The rivals had arrived. They were armed and determined, their intentions clear. Alara's mind raced. The king had left her to protect the child, trusting her with a responsibility that could mean life or death. She felt fear, yes, but also a deep surge of courage. She would not fail. She could feel the mark guiding her, urging her to move, to act. Slowly, she approached the window, peering down. The figures were numerous but disorganized, unaware of the power that lay within the child and the mark on her wrist. She realized then that this was not only a test of strength, but of wisdom and patience. She would need both to survive. Taking a deep breath, Alara focused on the glow of the mark, the warmth of the child in her arms, and the courage that had carried her this far. A sense of calm washed over her, mingled with determination. She would not run, she would not hide. She would face the threat, guided by the power that now flowed through her. The rivals began to breach the outer walls, their movements clumsy and loud. Alara watched, calculating. The mark pulsed stronger, guiding her attention to weak points, to shadows, to the rhythms of the approaching danger. She whispered softly to the child, feeling the warmth and light respond to her words. "Be strong, be brave, we will face this together." As the first of the rivals reached the tower's base, a sudden light flared from the child's body. The glow spread outward in a protective shield, shimmering like crystal and frost. The figures froze, blinded and disoriented by the sudden burst of energy. Alara gasped, realizing that the child was awakening a power beyond her understanding, but one she could guide. The mark on her wrist flared brightly, responding to her focus, her courage, and her resolve. She lifted the child slightly, and the glow intensified, creating a barrier that pushed the intruders back. The baby's cries mingled with her own words, forming a harmony of power that resonated through the tower. From the shadows, the Alpha King watched, his eyes wide with awe. He had known the child was important, but seeing its power manifest, and the Omega channeling it with courage and precision, filled him with both pride and a sense of wonder. "They are stronger than you know," he murmured to himself. "But she is more than I imagined." Alara felt the pull of the mark guiding her actions, the flow of energy connecting her to the child and to something ancient, powerful, and protective. The rivals stumbled, retreating under the force of the light. One by one they fled into the snow, unable to comprehend the power they faced. When the last shadow disappeared, Alara's body trembled, exhaustion and adrenaline mingling in a heady rush. She sank to her knees, holding the child close. The glow dimmed slowly, returning to a gentle pulse. The door opened quietly behind her. The Alpha King entered, his expression unreadable but his eyes softening as they met hers. "You did well," he said simply. "The child's power is dangerous, unpredictable, but you guided it. You have learned to trust the mark and to trust yourself. That is no small feat." Alara looked up at him, breathless, her hands still clutching the child. I didn't know I could do it. I was scared. I still am." The king stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Fear is natural. Courage is acting in spite of it. You have both, and that is why the child is safe. That is why we are alive." For a long moment the room was silent except for the baby's gentle breathing. The Alpha King studied her, seeing not just the Omega who had been thrust into destiny, but a woman who had risen to meet it with bravery and heart. Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest, not the cold of the snow, not the fear of the rivals, but a steady, powerful warmth that told her she was no longer alone. The child's glow, the mark on her wrist, and the Alpha King's presence formed a triangle of strength and trust that could not be broken easily. Outside, the wind whispered against the stone walls, carrying the faint echo of distant dangers still waiting. The trials were not over. The curse, the rivals, and the power within the child were only the beginning. But within the tower, a bond had formed, a bond of courage, trust, and destiny that would guide them through whatever came next. Ilara held the child closer, feeling the pulse of the mark, the warmth of life in her arms, and the presence of the Alpha King beside her. She had faced the first real test, and though the journey ahead promised even greater dangers, she felt a new certainty. She would protect the child, she would embrace her destiny, and she would face every trial, no matter how terrifying, with courage and heart. The snow continued to fall outside, soft and relentless, but within the tower, light, warmth, and determination burned brighter than any storm. The Omega had found her strength. The child had awakened its power. And together with the Alpha King they would face the coming darkness. The world was watching, and they were ready. The morning sun broke over the castle walls, glinting off the frost that still clung stubbornly to the towers. The city below seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but within the Alpha King's fortress, tension thrummed like a living heartbeat. The trials had grown more difficult each day, the shadows of the curse reaching farther, testing courage, strength, and resolve. Ilara stood by the tower window, holding the child tightly, her eyes tracing the distant horizon. The mark on her wrist pulsed steadily, a rhythmic reminder of the bond she shared with the Alpha King and the child. Each pulse seemed to carry a message. The time had come to face the final trial. The Alpha King entered silently, his cloak brushing the floor, eyes dark with thought but soft with trust. "Are you ready?" he asked. Ilara turned to him, her jaw set. "I am." "Whatever comes, we face it together." He nodded, a rare smile flickering across his face. "Good. Today we end the curse. Today the destiny begins anew." Outside, the wind shifted. The snow had begun to fall again, but this time it seemed lighter, almost ceremonial, as though the world itself held its breath for the events about to unfold. The child stirred in Ilara's arms, its tiny eyes opening to reveal a light far brighter than she had ever seen before. The king stepped closer, his hand brushing hers gently, reassuringly. "You will guide it," he said. "You are the bond. Your courage, your heart, your trust in the mark, they are what will break the curse." Ilara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the words settle over her like a mantle. She could not deny the fear that lingered in the shadows of her heart, yet alongside it burned a courage she had discovered in the days since finding the child. She had faced enemies, controlled the power of the mark, and learned the depth of her own strength. She would not fail now. Together they left the tower, the child glowing softly in her arms. The castle corridors were silent, the usual bustle of servants and guards replaced by an almost sacred stillness. They passed through the main hall, where the Alpha King paused, drawing a deep breath. "Everything depends on this moment," he said softly. "The curse will test us. It will show us visions of fear, of loss, of despair. You must trust the mark, trust the child, and trust yourself. Only then will it be broken." Ilara nodded, gripping the child tightly. The warmth from the baby spread into her chest, and she felt the mark pulse in harmony with her heartbeat. Together, they stepped into the courtyard, where the snow shimmered like diamonds under the pale morning sun. From the edges of the castle, shadows began to rise. Figures cloaked in dark, frozen mist emerged, their forms both human and otherworldly. These were the remnants of the curse, the manifestations of fear, doubt, and the power that had haunted the Alpha King's bloodline for generations. The king drew his sword, the metal glinting in the light. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice calm but commanding. The child's power will guide us, but I will protect you. Alara took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She could feel the mark, warm and insistent, pulsing like a drumbeat through her veins. She whispered to the child, her voice steady, soft, and full of conviction. We are together. We are strong. We will not fear. The shadows advanced, swirling around them like black smoke, their voices a cacophony of whispers and threats. The child stirred, a glow spreading from its small body, cutting through the darkness with pure, radiant light. Alara lifted it higher, letting the warmth flow from her heart into the child, into the mark, and into the world around them. The shadows recoiled, screeching and writhing as the combined power of the Omega and the child pushed against them. The king advanced, sword swinging, cutting through the dark forms, though none of them could match the radiant light emanating from the child. Alara felt a connection she had never experienced before. The mark, the child, and the Alpha King all linked in a single rhythm of power, courage, and heart. She realized then that the curse was not only a test of strength, but a test of unity, trust, and love. The shadows began to focus on her, drawn to the fear she had once felt. They whispered visions of despair. The child lost, the king defeated, the kingdom swallowed in darkness. Alara's chest tightened, but she refused to falter. She pressed the child closer, letting its warmth fill her, letting the mark guide her actions. Not now, not ever, she whispered, her voice rising, firm and unwavering. We are stronger than you. We are together. The glow intensified, brighter than the sun breaking over the horizon, and the shadows began to shatter, dissipating into the air like mist in morning light. The king fought alongside her, yet it was the child's pure, radiant power, amplified by Alara's courage and the mark, that truly drove the darkness away. When the last shadow dissolved, silence fell over the courtyard. The snow glimmered peacefully, untouched, as though the world itself had sighed in relief. Alara knelt, holding the child, tears of exhaustion and triumph streaming down her face. The mark on her wrist had dimmed slightly, a soft glow remaining as a reminder of the bond and the journey they had shared. The king approached, his steps deliberate, and knelt beside her. You have done it, he said quietly, awe in his voice. The curse is broken. Your courage, your heart, and the bond with the child, it has freed us all. Alara looked up at him, her chest heaving, her hands still clutching the glowing child. We did it, she whispered, disbelief and joy mingling in her voice. The king's expression softened, a rare, gentle smile breaking across his face. Yes, he said, together. The child's power, the mark, and your courage, they were the key. The darkness can no longer touch this kingdom. For the first time since finding the child in the snow, Alara felt a sense of peace. The weight of fear, of uncertainty, of destiny lifted from her shoulders. She had faced the trials, embraced the power within her, and emerged stronger than she had ever imagined. The child stirred again, tiny hands reaching toward her face, a soft glow warming the air around them. Alara laughed softly, the sound full of relief and joy. The king watched them, eyes filled with a depth of feeling few had ever glimpsed. You have grown, he said, his voice almost a whisper, not just in courage but in heart. The mark has chosen well, and so has fate. Alara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. I never knew I could do it. I never knew I had this strength. The king reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Strength is not always visible, he said softly. Sometimes it is found in the smallest acts of courage, in the decisions to protect, to trust, and to hope. You have done all of these and more. They stood together, the child glowing softly between them, the snow falling like blessings from the sky. Outside, the world seemed brighter, as though freed from a shadow that had lingered for generations. The curse was gone, but the bond they had forged between Omega, Alpha King, and child was eternal. Alara felt a warmth in her chest, not only from the child but from the presence of the king beside her. Their eyes met, and for the first time the unspoken connection, forged through fear, courage, and shared destiny, was acknowledged fully. "We have a future now," the king said quietly, "a future that we choose together. The kingdom is safe, and the child's power will grow in peace." Alara nodded, feeling a sense of completion, yet understanding that this was also a beginning. The trials had ended, but the journey of life, of learning, and of protecting what they loved would continue. She pressed the child closer, letting the warmth flow from her heart through the mark and into the tiny being that had changed everything. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but the winds had softened. The kingdom, the castle, and the world beyond seemed alive with possibility, free from the shadows of the past. And within the tower, a new chapter began, one of hope, trust, and a bond that could never be broken. The Alpha King stepped closer, hand brushing hers lightly, a quiet acknowledgement of shared triumph and enduring connection. "The mark remains," he said, nodding to her wrist. "A reminder of what you have endured and what you are capable of. It is not a curse, but a gift. You are no longer just an Omega. You are the protector, the guide, and the heart of this destiny." Elara smiled, tears shining in her eyes. I will honor it," she said. "I will protect the child, and I will embrace the path we have begun together." The king's gaze softened, and for a moment the legend of the Alpha King faded, leaving only the man who had trusted her, guided her, and now shared in the victory that had been hard-earned. "Together," he said. "Yes, together," she whispered, holding the child close. The snow continued to fall outside, peaceful and silent. The storm of the past had passed. The curse had been broken. And in the quiet glow of the tower, three hearts beat in harmony: the Omega who had found her strength, the Alpha King who had reclaimed his destiny, and the child who carried hope for a future free of shadows. The world had changed. And for the first time, Elara felt truly at home within it, guided by courage, bound by love, and ready for whatever came next. The mark on her wrist pulsed softly, a quiet heartbeat of destiny fulfilled. And as the sun rose higher, its light catching the snow in a dazzling display, the three of them, Omega, King, and Child, stood together, unbroken, unafraid, and ready to face the future, whatever it might hold. The trials were over. The journey had only just begun.